Ferguson, and I am Shisa's Communication Director and longtime survivor advocate. At Shisa, we aim to provide you with the best practices and insights about navigating consent crimes such as SA, sexual harassment, and domestic violence. Through our content, we aim to return the power back to the people just like you. July is National Minority Mental Health Month, and one of our guests has joined to speak on the topic specifically within a workplace context. Today, we welcome Shawnnell Batiste, licensed professional counselor, psychotherapist, and owner of her practice, Choosing Empowerment, which was born to take care for the marginalized and disenfranchised through barrier breaking, high accountability, no BS mental health and wellness services. Choosing Empowerment is also a partner of freebblacktherapy.org, which, as the name suggests, provides free therapy to Black individuals in need. So, Shawnnell, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I am doing well. Had a little freeze just now. Hopefully. All right. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I did.
Could you tell us a little bit about what inspired your practice and how it currently helps your community navigate consent crimes like the ones we previously mentioned?
Well, Choosing Empowerment, as you said, was born to work with marginalized and disenfranchised communities, such as the BIPOC community. I work with foster and adoptive children. I work with formerly incarcerated individuals. And SA is intricately sprinkled into all of those communities, right? The purpose is for my practice is to provide access, right? These communities often have trouble due to stigma, finances, several barriers. And so we decided to be a barrier breaking agency, right? To get those things out of the way. And stigma is one of those big things when it comes to SA, right? People, the victim blaming, just the stigma surrounding, being a victim. So in my practice, I come across, even though I don't specifically reach for those, there are very few people that has not had at least one incident in their life, and so I see it throughout my practice, every age, every gender, every sexuality, like it touches everybody in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. And what was it that inspired you to pursue, becoming a therapist, becoming a psychotherapist?
Well, I tell people this is who I am and not what I do. Mm-hmm. At age 7, I sat on the porch and told somebody, I don't even remember who I was talking to, but I told somebody I wanted to be a child psychiatrist. Likely because of the troubles in my own family. I've always been very insightful. I have always been the person that people came to talk about their issues and their problems. And I've never been like a gossiper, and I don't tell other people's business. And so I became a safe place for a lot of people. So I feel like I'm just kind of called to do it. Always got to school, went to school for psychology, got my undergraduate degree. It took me 13 years to get a 4-year degree, but I kept moving forward. Eventually I got my master's degree and started doing this work. I did it within, the community centers. I've worked with clients, CPS clients. I've worked with people of all walks of life. And so then I decided to open my practice. Initially, my practice was open because my best friend in New Orleans, I'm from New Orleans, and she started a nonprofit after school and summer programming. And I wanted to implement a mental health component to that because most of the kids that she was working with were kids who had behavioral issues, and we want them in camp, but it's likely they're going to break some rules. And so we put that mental health component to it. It worked out beautifully. Kids stayed in camp that usually wouldn't stay in camp because they, instead of getting in trouble and getting put out, they came and talked to Miss Shawnnell, and we did some therapeutic work, or we stayed busy and and we talked about the things that was bothering them at home and stuff like that. So that's how it got started. Top of 2020, we all know what happened in 2020. And so it was a great time to open the practice and actually start taking clients in. And right after George Floyd was murdered, that's when I decided to really, really hone in on my population, because there was a big need and there was not enough of us to do it. And so I just tightened that thing up and started working with mostly minority groups.
Okay. And as we know, and as we've seen with the general population finally starting to awaken to the realities of a lot of these very present issues, the onus is often put onto the people of color to do the work of explaining, to do the work of including, to do the work of getting angry and initiating movements. And it's not the responsibility of those people to bear the burden of educating everybody else. And I've seen quite a few calls for, protecting one's own mental health, protecting one's own spirit in those spaces. So I would imagine a practice like yours that provides kind of that support specifically for those communities, especially during those really re-traumatizing times, would be very, very valuable.
Absolutely. It's often, like you said, we have to try to explain it to people, and it's hard because people negate our experiences. Anytime somebody says, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, then the police shouldn't stop you. Like that's very dismissing, right?
Absolutely.
And so,
especially when there's opportunities to be stopped by the police that have nothing to do with the crime.
Right, exactly. And so there's so many experiences that my clients don't have to explain. I remember my 17-year-old, she was a few years ago, and she had a white therapist, and the woman was wonderful. She loved her, absolutely loved her. But my daughter said she spent 15 minutes explaining our hair because she had an anxiety, and it was connected to going outside when it was raining or misty and her hair was straight. Okay. And so, and it was something that she had to explain. And she was like, and don't get me wrong, I also enjoy educating. I really do. But in certain, environments, right? And in that particular case, she's like, that's 15 minutes. I could have been processing something deeper, right? And so having someone that looks like you, that share the same experiences, is vital to the therapeutic relationship and bond. And that relationship is the most important thing when it comes to healing, when you have to feel safe, right? And so if you're sitting before somebody that I know you've experienced the same type of things, we're all different, but we're all the same, right? And so if I know we have some shared experiences, and that's one thing that I do that's different within Choosing Empowerment, which is, against everything that they teach us in school, is like non-disclosure. I don't mind sharing myself, right? If I'm talking about parenting and I can tell you about my kids, then I understand the experience, right? And so that solidifies a connection, and it helps the people to understand that I truly understand. And so that's just how and then that's what I mean by no BS, right? I'm not going to cut corners. I am not going to give you too much fluff. I'm going to give it to you real. I tell my clients, cycle breaking is hard. It's the hardest job you'll ever have to do, because you're going against everything in your bloodline. Like everything from your past is fighting against the thing that you're trying to do different. And so I'm just honest. I'm honest and straightforward, but I do it with love and compassion. And I want to be the support system and the guidance for my clients.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of, this community that you have honed in on, right? The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission stated for fiscal years 2018 to 2021. So that, just those prime years right before the pandemic leading to the beginning of it, that the percent of sexual harassment charges concurrently filed with race charges was disproportionately far higher for Black or African American workers at a staggering rate of 71.2%.
Wow.
So we're seeing that those concurrent complaints are just so much higher than probably anybody expects. In your experience, what are some of the biggest barriers your community faces when experiencing and dealing with sexual harassment at work? And why do you think those numbers are so much higher for Black workers?
People don't value us. People don't value us. In general, in the general population in society, Black women are at the bottom of the totem pole, right? The least paid, the least respected. Our opinions are less valued. And so it does not surprise me that those numbers correlate so much or are concurrent like that, because that has been our experience. And that's most of the time our experience. Sitting and compared to anybody else, we are less respected, right? By evidence of the Crown Act, right? Only last year that we were able to wear our hair as it grows out of our scalp, without it being considered unkempt or not professional, right? And like this, it shocks me. It still shocks me of where we are now, and we're just acknowledging that, right? And so imagine how many women Black women have had to conform just in hairstyle alone, and it affects your own self-worth and your own self-value when you walk into a workplace, but you don't, you're not treated equal as, right? Or as good as. And so it's not shocking to me because the value is so low for us that there's more harassment reports. And I'm glad they're reporting it, because that's a whole nother issue in itself.
I have definitely seen in some of my research that amongst the Black and BIPOC community, that we're seeing that the general loose number of those that have survived SA or sexual SA specifically is about 1 in 6 women, which is, I think, demonstrably higher than most people would expect. But it does specify that number is grossly underreported within those BIPOC communities for a myriad of reasons, right? Like to your beginning of this conversation, there's so many nuances around why someone may or may not report. But to know specifically that this community is largely and disproportionately impacted, and also potentially may not feel safe enough to make those reports.
Absolutely.
It just highlights the need for these kind of services, for these kind of paradigms of care,
right?
Access.
I mean, if you look at it historically, and I usually bring things back to slavery, if that was a norm for you and it was expected that you take it and be quiet, right? Because you did not have rights and you did not have, you were not even seen as human. And that, again, that's only quite a few hundred years ago, right? And then that generational trauma. And when we come out of slavery, we didn't get counselors. It's like, let's talk about your slavery experience. Only now are we starting to recognize and realize as a community that we need all of that and that we're affected by that. And then the things the way we were treated as slaves, like that carried down, right? I speak to people all the time about, why do you think Black people often, use corporal punishment? Well, that's how we were punished as slaves. So that's all we learned, right? And so you carry all of those things and those generational traumas down. Well, the SA is the same, right? Yes, I'm the victim, but why should I say anything? Who will believe me? People are going to blame me anyway. And my favorite, what did you have on?
What were you wearing? How were you approaching them?
and we internalize that. I even thinking about my own experiences because I too have experienced that. And, I did it to myself, right? Oh, it was because he knew I had a crush on him and I liked him and maybe he thought, no, having a crush on somebody does not give them a right to take advantage of, right? And it's that, and I think some of it is also connected to just this patriarchal society that we have, because women in general are valued at less as well, right? The ownership, you belong to me, right? I can do what I want to you and all that. And so the entitlement of a patriarchal society, along with, race, socioeconomical status, all these things that we place value on, then I can take what I want to from you because you have less value, right? So that's a mentality, right? And it's a sad mentality, but it's a mentality.
Absolutely. And so when dealing with specifically sexual harassment in the workplace, with your community that you serve, what do you see those biggest barriers being as far as either reporting it or receiving any type of support for it? And why do you, and you've touched on why you think that it is so much higher for the Black and BIPOC community, but why do you think that or what is the challenge there once it has happened?
Safety. I don't feel safe in the workplace, right? Based upon the information I just was talking about a minute ago, is that especially if I'm in like corporate America of any type, right? If say if you had a small company like mine, okay, I'm a mental health organization, you have access to your boss, like, I'm small and all that. Well, someone might feel more comfortable coming to me and saying, hey, this thing happened, right? Bigger corporation, especially as a minority, if it's run by white people, if the culture in the space, right, is conducive to that, right? Do we have, the good old boys making those comments, right? So it's just, there's so many different nuances. I've had several clients who they reported and got counseling and they were still blamed, right? They were still some way blamed, were you dressed appropriately? Or like even the concept of workplace relationships, like, how close were you? Did you flirt? Like, it's a matter, I think, of safety. If I don't feel safe, I'm not going to say anything. All right. If no one's going to believe me, I'm not going to say anything. So that in itself, the culture, I think, is the biggest barrier. I think, do you provide as a company this safe environment? When I go to HR, what is the protocol? Like, what is the procedure? I had one client in a workplace experience outside of work where they were like on a business trip type of thing. They were harassed, they were harassed, and they already had history, right? And so that plays a part, should I say anything? This is a trigger. This reminds me, right? And then we had to process whether they were going to report, right? You need to report. But what do I have to go through to report? Like, what is it? Is the process within myself is already hard. Is the process with the job easy? Do I have to look in that person's face? Are they, are they going to take my word for it and eventually investigate? Like, there's all of those different things going through your head as a victim in yourself, right? Dealing with the trauma of the thing and all that. So it's difficult. It's very difficult if the culture of the workplace is not conducive to safety.
Absolutely. And to your point, I mean, honestly, how many of us are at this point in life, trying to get through the day in our job and do a good job for our work, show up and give our best selves while the world, has so much happening at once right now. And there's so many things lobbied to us, personally directed to us constantly to keep
Right.
us aware and to keep us anxious and all that stuff. And so the idea of unlocking a potential litigation or a potential really long process of just trying to express that I didn't feel safe, and that alone could create resistance, because you're just like, I don't have time
Yes.
for anything else. Can I
Yeah.
just
Or energy. The energy that it takes to report the thing and what you have to go through. Like,
I mean,
so-
how I once had to go through a process with HR about a paycheck that was overpaid automatically. And that
come
was
on.
kind of like constant conversations about what happened. And that had nothing to do with not only something that on its own can be really challenging and traumatizing, but that can compound, Pat, to your point, past pains. And at what point do we have to bring SA and a history of trauma to the forefront of a conversation in a workplace to establish boundaries for other people? And how can these companies start establishing the boundaries and protecting the people from the get-go, right? And removing the blame
from the victim.
person that has the balls to say something happened to them. I really resonate with that. And as you mentioned, the unfortunate reality is a lot of us know that at least traditionally HR exists to protect a company more so than
the humans.
Not the impression we go into our roles with. We think it has to do with making sure we're safe. So you kind of touched on this, but just specifically with that in mind, in your experience, do you feel your clients who encountered sexual harassment at work knew how to protect themselves in that setting, or do they come to you with those questions?
Many times they come to me with those questions. You have a handbook, you have the guidelines, but it's the nuances. It's the unspoken things. It's is it worth me saying anything? Should I just leave my job and let it go? What do I have to go through? And is it worth my mental health state? Right. And it's the same thing I see across the board with reporting, just in general. Right. Do I have the wherewithal to go through the process? Because this is painful and I'm gonna have to keep repeating the story. And, my daughter had an incident her senior year of high school, right in the complex where I live. And it was a stranger. And so that last year of high school was so highly difficult, reporting, not wanting to say anything to me, right? Finally saying something to me because I see behaviors, like what's going on with you? Her sister was aware. And so and we have a rule in our house, if it's something that mama needs to know, you have this amount of days to tell her or I'm ratting you out, right? If it has to do with your safety. And, and she's like, I'm going to tell it if you don't tell it, and then she broke down, talked to me about it. She was afraid of ruining our vacation because we was going to take a small vacation during that time. And I'm like, man, forget a vacation, like you, right? And immediately called the police. But having to revamp the story for the sketch artist, for having to tell the story to the cops, having to, talk about it in therapy and every time having to relive this experience, right? Struggling in school because of it, and we got her like on a specialized plan so that because some days she was great and other days don't talk to her, but she was still required to show up, right? And so that was put in place. But even after she had a male counselor who was, she was talking about her struggles in school and why and her trauma. And she went through the whole story and didn't have to. And he even asked her why she didn't do XYZ, right? And so she calls and she's like, Mom, just in case the school calls you, I cussed out my counselor. And, I'm like, cool, rightfully so. And so her school is great. They took care of her. She didn't have to see him anymore. But just the mentality of even her school counselor, rather than having that compassion, asked her why she didn't go this place instead of that place with the assumption that would stop the happenings, That's stuff that you deal with over and over and over again, right? And thank God for her, because her mother is a counselor, because
Yeah.
I make sure she has her resources. I'm going to support you. But what if you have a parent who doesn't know how?
Yeah.
What if you have a parent who hasn't dealt with their own SA, right? And I have people in my life like that as well. One of my daughter's friends, same thing. Like, she had an incident and her mom was unable to help her to process it because she had never dealt with her own, and so now that becomes a generational issue. So there's so many layers. There's so many layers to it.
And the re-traumatization, that can't really be understated, because even I think healed trauma can manifest in the body, can manifest in the mind subconsciously, directly. There's so many, and we recently had a conversation with a therapist who described just the truly long-term physical side effects.
Yes, the body remembers.
Body of just our ovaries, and just any type of vulvovaginal pain, and there's so many layers to it that I think the more people are able to understand the comprehensive picture of recovery,
right. Yes.
let alone just the experience itself, I think that a lot of these topics would become mission critical, because they would recognize that it's literally a health issue. It
is. Yeah.
And
like they say, your physical health, your reproductive health, just your body in general. If you walk around hyper vigilant, I liken it to having a car that's idling, right? Like it's on, it's not going anywhere, but it's idling. So it's still burning gas. But it's like it's on, right? And that's how we walk around when we've been victims, when we have to feel like we have to watch our surroundings, and we're always, when you're hyper vigilant, you're like on alert all the time. Well, all of the chemicals that go through your body, the cortisol, all things that's necessary to keep you in a high awareness, like, you're idling all the time, and it's exhausting, right? By the end of the night, you're exhausted. I don't know what's going on with my body, because your body's always on. It's never resting, right? There's tension in my shoulders all the time. So those muscles are tight, and the relational things too, because how can I have intimacy when I don't know what real intimacy feels like, looks like, because of this incident or when it happened? You have a visceral response. Like, my daughter couldn't handle anybody touching the back of her neck, because it brought her straight back there. I had an incident as a teenager where I have to talk to my intimate partner and say, don't do this.
Yep.
All right. And so now they have to be conscious. Don't do that, and that's me being aware and willing to talk about it, right? And so, because most women don't talk about, what's good and what's not good, and what's okay and what's not okay, which brings on a whole nother subject,
Well, speaking of the awareness, right? Even with those clients that you have supported as they've encountered sexual harassment, and as they come to you with the questions, do you find that any of them know about the resources that are because, for example, as I'm sure you've heard, Shisa exists to create a space, a safe and valid and validatable space for people to log evidence and educate themselves about instances of sexual harassment or SA. And we're always just so curious to learn what the current status quo is of what people even know their options are legally, and from a business perspective, economically. Do you find that those clients come to you having any awareness of those resources, or are those
very little,
very little,
very little, very, very little? And those are clients who are naturally analytic or naturally look for those things, right? But usually, unless they're it's part of their life mission or purpose, or it's what their platform is, no, they don't. And so, and I'm happy to have you guys as a resource, right? Because it's so needed. It's so needed. even as a healer, as a helper, like I don't have all the answers, right? And I understand the importance of community and safety and having a place to be able to go get the information, to have a safe space to talk about the things. And, those things are vital to healing, also vital to help those who have been victims stand up,
Mhm.
right? When the Me Too movement happened, like that was amazing, right? Because this thing that had been kept in secret, right, was suddenly exposed, and everybody was like, "Yeah, I get, yep, yeah, I know what you're saying," right? And that happens in any arena where all it takes was a few people to stand up and say, "Okay, whatever happens, I'm saying something. I'm
Mhm.
saying something," right? And it gives other people the courage to do the same, right? And so organizations such as yours are vitally important to this mission of helping to heal this community. You know,
Well, thank you. And I agree with you and say the same to you. And one of my questions is, you mentioned that a lot of those clients that don't know that these resources exist are the kind of people
Mhm.
that know what resources exist in general and are the kind of people that would probably, seek out education. And so what I'm curious is specifically within the BIPOC community, do you know if there's any like myths or any type of taboos specifically that would prevent them from seeking that information for themselves?
Um, well, first, in the Black community specifically, what happens in my house stays in my house. And
Mhm.
so we don't talk about those things. Because many people's SA has occurred with a family member or somebody that they know, right? And so um, if Uncle Fester decided he was going to do something to Sally, um, Sally not supposed to say nothing. Even if Sally tells her mom is like, "Oh, we don't talk about that." But we don't talk about it because Grandpa did it to me, and we swept that under the rug too. So they learn to sweep the things under the rug and not address them, right? And for several reasons, is of course it's not intentionally to hurt the kid and all that stuff. But again, we talk historically. We weren't allowed to say anything right before anyway. And now, if stepdad or someone who's the head of household and taking care of all the bills and supporting the family, if I report and he goes to jail, what happens to my family? And
Mhm.
so there's so many nuances. It's literally, I never truly think that, somebody's just intentionally like, I don't care, right? It's usually protective in some way, shape, or form, whether it's protecting me from myself because I don't want to talk about mine, or I'm trying to maintain the household. I don't know what to do, or I'm in an unhealthy love and I can't let go of that. There are so many things, right? And I've had someone before who um, was so in the story, in her narrative,
Mhm.
which was generational because her mother had the same narrative. And she didn't even recognize that she was being perpetrated on. In her mind, her mom's boyfriend became her boyfriend,
Yeah.
right? And she came to therapy with that,
Mhm.
right? And so getting her to even change that whole mindset. And I'm like, he perped you and he convinced you that you were his girlfriend and but children can't consent. And just explain the rules of the thing, right? And so there's so many layers to the situations, right? And so in our community, and much like my clients from the Hispanic community, uh, lots of minority communities have like a don't ask, don't tell. I'm not telling my business, right? And so that means I'm not going to report. If I can't report to my mom, I certainly can't report to the police, right? you know. So there's a bit of shame, lots of shame, lots of guilt.
Mhm.
I would rather shut it down than speak out loud about it. what are the repercussions again, right? And so those are big barriers. I think the biggest barriers are our tendency to just keep everything inside and not tell the world anything, right? I mean, as a community and BIPOC, we're already deemed again as less valuable, right? And so are they gonna do anything about it anyway? Or are they just gonna, so like it's a mentality that we're getting better. Lots of people coming to therapy, lots of people talking about the things, and not too long ago, I talked to somebody who has had several incidents back to back, and literally emotionally just can't report.
Mm-hmm.
Emotionally, they can't do it right now. The state of their life is tough. These things keep happening. It's like, I need to get to a certain level in my healing first before I can say this to anybody outside of my therapy, right? Exactly. And stuff like that. And so, because it takes a lot of strength, it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of wherewithal. You have to go through a lot of stuff, right? If my daughter didn't have me as her support system, I doubt if we would have been able to go through all of that, right? And we just talked about it recently, and I was like, I'm glad that you were able to, because now there is a sketch. Now his face is out there. He fled the area because somebody recognized him, right? Somebody recognized him, called me, and and they almost had him, right? But now if he gets pulled over, there's a warrant, right? And so it causes the paper trail, so that if he does that again, that there's the increased likelihood that he'll get arrested and hopefully serve time, and get off the streets.
So it sounds like specifically in the workplace, it sounds like a lot of the barriers are kind of these internalized realities that for history, you report as this person of color, or as this minority, as a woman, and you face all different levels of, of retribution and of, even if you are ultimately victorious in that claim, you're opening yourself up to potentially a lawsuit, a trial. It really just depends on the scope of your particular experience. But I think sometimes that unknown of how much pain that's going to have inside of its container, right? It seems like that's probably been one of the main, it's just internalizing all of those realities as fact when we're trying to do the work to change it, because it is fact. It is what happened.
Yeah, it's what happened, right?
And to deprogram things that have been internalized, to your point, for generations. That's a lot of work, and it's work we don't want to keep putting onto those that are experiencing whatever that trauma or whatever that abuse is. So with sexual harassment specifically, kind of in the workplace, what have you seen as some really long-term negative effects of that through the clients that have experienced sexual harassment? Scanning the gamut. It could be mental health, it could be productivity, it could be, the ability to increase their position in life and move forward on the corporate ladder. What are those negative side effects you've seen?
All of the above. So of course, I'm going to always go for mental health first, because everything is connected to your mental health, right? Your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual well-being. Like, you can't be your full self without managing that mental health, right? And so that means I walk around afraid. I walk around with less confidence. I don't feel good about myself. So I'm not going to go for the higher position. I might not engage well with socially or within a work environment. I don't feel like a leader. So that's affecting your ability. Like, I don't feel confident to ask for a raise, and I know I've been doing this work, right? So you don't go for the things at work. You're not engaging well with others. You don't. The communication skills are reduced. I might sit in this dead position, that I don't like anymore, but I'm not going to say a word, right? I'm not going to stand up for myself if something happens that's wrong or, inappropriate. I might not say anything else. There's so many things, and I don't have the confidence to quit and look for something else, right? So that's going to affect my economics. That's affect my ability to grow within a company, and so there's so many things there. On the outside, of course, you got your mental health and your well-being, and it's going to affect your household, right? Again, financially, your relationships with your spouse or your community, your children, right? If I'm stressed and I'm agitated and I'm sad and I'm depressed, and then I can't function well in my household, right? And I certainly in the community can't do the same, right? So it affects all aspects of life. So there's a trickle down effects that each thing affects the other thing, right?
And it's funny because speaking as just a woman in corporate America who worked in mostly male dominated teams in my 20s, I wasn't even working against some of those unconscious biases of being a person of color. But I know that when you're put in positions of potentially being under people are underestimating you,
Yes.
the assumptions they're making of you. But also once they start to send that energy your way, that is maybe flirtatious, so that is maybe inappropriate. And especially if you've experienced something concentrated that you now have to go and think about every time you walk into that office, when that person that potentially has more power than you or more privilege or whatever it is, that you have to face them. And you kind of adopt that mentality of towing the line. And it's almost like you're a criminal who is not to ruffle any feathers.
Come on, man.
Who's trying not to create any waves. You're like, if I can get through the day,
right,
walk out without, because if you're the person that's your mentality all day long, to your point, you walk away heavy at the end of the day.
Yes.
With needing a sigh from just that part of your job. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't recognize and don't talk about. And sometimes, to your point, they don't even have a name for what they're doing to themselves because they're just under the impression that they are being good employees, good, good peers, good people who don't want to create any trouble. And again, I think it comes back to that point of let's move the onus away from having those that are more susceptible to this kind of incident,
right,
and move it towards educating leadership, educating, the public, educating the corporate org structure, all of that. Definitely resonate with everything that you've said so far. When you are dealing with people that have experienced this, what are the main tools that you will assign to them? That can be within your practice, like how do you guys psychologically and physically go through these tool sets? And then also, if you can tap on towards the end, what are some free tools and resources that people can leverage at home?
So within therapy, we always work on self-worth, confidence, doing what it is that you love. Because for the workplace, I am often like, are you even doing the job you like? Like, you're dealing with that, and do you even want to be there? And so part of that building that self-worth and self-confidence is finding themselves, right? What do you really enjoy? What do you really like? Like, can we get you out of that environment where you can thrive, right? And of course, dealing with the depression, the anxiety, and those things there, psychological, physiological. Like, I love grounding. You can do, mental, physical grounding. I feel anxious. I'm going to hold this chair and think about the fact that I'm holding this chair in order to bring myself back down and get that nervous system back calm. Or a physical, actual, literal grounding. Go put your feet in the grass, right? Like, ground yourself, right? So that you can feel the earth, right? And become connected with it. And so there are small tools like that. I love the tool of journaling, right? Because as a victim, you keep the things inside And I have a phrase that what's in you has to come out of you. And either it's going to come out fighting, or you can help it get out in a more appropriate way where it's healing for you. And journaling is one of those things that I recommend to everybody. It's hard for some people, but there's no right or wrong way to do it. Just get it out of you, right? Some people like to video journal. Some people like to voice journal. I love the act of writing. There's something about the hand and the brain connection that processes that thing out of you, and it's very cathartic. And I tease people and say, at the end of the day, the worst thing that could happen is you'll have a great book after this, right? And so, that's a tool that I often like to use. Affirmations, just telling yourself every day, even if it's stuff as small as I'm okay. Mm-hmm. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm going to make this okay. And not okay in that I'm going to ignore it and pretend like it doesn't exist. I'm okay because I'm going to create a situation for myself that is going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And so I encourage people to, find themselves. I encourage people to not stay in positions that don't feel good, and be that workplace relations or personal relations. Like, if it's not working for you, what do we need to do to help pluck you out of that, and you don't keep, a plant in a pot where it can't grow, right? You want to move it. You want to nurture it. You want to give it some extra dirt to work with, and you want to surround it with other things that it can grow with, right? So I talk a lot about community and connection, because those things help us grow too. Being in the right place where you can be encouraged, where, somebody has your back, whether they've been through it or they know somebody, because everybody at least knows somebody, that has been through it. And so having that circle that helps you to grow and flourish and, and that way you can wind up being help to somebody else, because we heal so much when we choose to help somebody else do a thing, and so if somebody can be a resource for that other person, that also is a help.
Mm-hmm. And of some of these practices or some of these resources, has there been any one of them that you've seen just almost always get to a breakthrough? And it could be even just like a legal resource. It could even anything that you've seen almost without fail be an arrow in somebody's quiver.
As far as a resource, I haven't had a one go-to, you guys, offer a lot, and I think you guys would be a great resource. I'm connecting with some other smaller resources, and they do overall resource. But I'm connecting more and more intentionally with agencies that that's specific, like this is their mission, right? The mission is to do this thing, to take care of this thing. And so, but I haven't had any that that all encompass, that I can oh, you talk to these people and they got you, so there's usually you got to get a little from here and a little from there. So I haven't had one yet.
It starts with that self-worth work. It starts with really analyzing your situation, your career, your place. Is this worth even this fight, or do you deserve more?
Right.
I think that protocol, that kind of internal checklist, is in its own way really valuable for a lot of these people who are coming to you and who might be listening today. When you say you're connecting with other agencies and potentially maybe other thought leaders or people that can provide support for your clients, are there any standout accounts or social media, people, or is there anyone that you would suggest people follow or pay attention to just to get, and it could be everything from, an advocate that knows how to approach it to, an account that just presents information or presents motivational insights?
Okay. I have some. And you have to forgive my ADHD because they're not coming to my head right now. I'll definitely leave you a list. I would definitely give you a list of after. Definitely a person that I just met. She has her own story. And she is definitely an advocate in creating in the midst of creating her organization, to help women move in, just glorious light, right? And I happen to have her in my phone right now. So I'm looking, because I remember to ask her yesterday for her information. And her agency is called.
And while she's looking that up, we'll likely have a list of, links or handles attached to the video that people can go explore.
So she is Dr. J. Burns, and her agency is sexualityunplugged.com.
Okay.
But I'll leave that with you so that you'll have the URL. Beautiful, beautiful soul. Beautiful soul. And I felt a need to connect to her in a coaching class that we have together because of her story, right? And that's the other thing that's important for us to be able to help each other, like share the story, heal from it and share the story, right? Because we also have to change the narrative of how we tell it, because there is power and empowerment in everything that we go through, right? And just because of a bad thing, and I use the quotes a bad thing happened, that doesn't mean there's not something you're going to get out of it, right? Many of us have become very resilient because of our experiences. I am sad that we had to go through it in that manner, right? But so many women and Black women and BIPOC women, and we have learned to stand up and be stronger because you get tired of the crap at some point, right? It took for things to happen to us for us to start saying, it does not matter what I had on. You do not have the right, right? Yeah. And so in order for us to gain that, sometimes you got to get mad enough. Sometimes you got to get upset enough. Sometimes you got to be like, this is it. I'm done. We're done. Let's get together. This has to stop, right? And that's how some of the, sexual harassment stuff, that's how HR became aware of those things, and those things are in place now, right? Are they perfect? They're not perfect by far, right? But they're there when they weren't before, right? And so in order to create change, we have to stand up and we have to start telling our stories. It helps everybody to know that we are not alone. It helps other people be able to say, hey, this thing happened. I don't want it to happen to you. Here's how we keep ourselves safe. No, it's not our fault, but here's how we keep ourselves safe. And I see so many people. As a matter of fact, I need to find someone on TikTok to give to you as well. And I love that she educates from the other end too, right? It's not just, educating and helping the victims. There's literally like, how not to sexually harass somebody, and I love the way she did it. And so, or I'm listening to coaches and men, who are leaders starting to say directly to these guys, oh, if she gave you a look, that doesn't automatically mean it's on, if she kissed you in the car, right? I don't care. Every step needs consent. Right. So there's little things that they're like, the men are starting to come out and tell other men, like, this is not how we treat our women. Right. And so I love that part. I love that it's not just women. And that's not to negate the experience of men, because men get assaulted too. You know what I'm saying? And all that. But hey, for them to even be able to come out and say, hey, it happened to me too. Right. And that's also not okay. So I just love the education that is starting to go forth, especially with social media and spreading the truth, right? And so I think it's giving people confidence, it's giving people boldness, and that's how we change things. That's exactly how we change things.
Absolutely. As you said, the boldness that comes from it, the resilience that comes from these experiences, from what I've seen, the amount of empathy that's unlocked.
Yes.
Once you see just how subtle and just how intentional,
Mm-hmm.
but commonplace so
Yes.
many of these aggressions, whether they're micro or concentrated aggressions can be.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that empathy too is what the world needs. It's
Yes.
great if we could get there without these kinds of catalysts, but
Right.
while we're here to be able to harness, and I love that your practice is called choosing empowerment, because empowerment is such a core
It's a choice.
of
And it's
being.
a choice.
It
And
is
it's literally a choice. You have to choose to stand up for yourself,
that's
right? You have to choose that.
role over the victim role.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And and that way you don't allow it to have, because there's a certain amount of allowance because of your cowering or your, I don't feel like I have the right or whatever that is, right? And at some point you like my most recent client was like, I have to choose me. I have to choose me. And so no more of this. And I'm not going to attract this to me anymore in any way, shape, or form. And I'm going to build myself up, and I will not wear a sign on my forehead that says victim,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm going to wear my no BS sign
Mm-hmm.
so that any fool from a mile away know he cannot come to victimize me, right?
Absolutely.
Because people like that look for prey, right? They're predators looking for prey. I choose not to be prey anymore, right? And I want to teach the women and the men and the people around me, you don't have to be prey either, because you can get rid of that if we don't present ourselves as the weakest link.
Absolutely. What a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shawnnell. Your
Thank
insight
you for
has
having
been
me.
so appreciated. To our viewers, thanks for watching, and feel free to follow Shawnnell's work on Instagram at Choosing Empowerment or YouTube at Choosing Empowerment_no BS. If you're a Black community member in need of free therapy, please give freeblackTherapy.org a visit. And at Shisa, we also currently offer a Statutes of Limitations Map to show you how long you have to report incidences of sexual harassment and SA by state, and an AI chatbot that is trained to answer your most pressing questions about navigating sexual harassment at work. Check it out at the link below. We'll also include links to all of Shawnnell's top resources. And until then, we'll see you all next time on the Shisa Speaks podcast. Thank you so much, Shawnnell. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you.